edition of the weather and wildfire briefing. Hopefully, at some point in the not too distant future, we'll return to more regularly scheduled, or at least semi-regularly scheduled office hours, focusing more on bigger picture scientific and weather issues rather than potentially imminent disasters. But for now, we're sort of still in that mode. But there is a big shift coming up with some meaningful rain expected this weekend across most of Southern California. We'll talk about that primarily today. And then also the ongoing wildfire threat until it actually arrives, which is more than 36 hours out still, and how things have transpired recently in terms of the now record-breaking late start to the rainy season. Again, we're speaking today on January 24th. Hasn't come yet to Southern California, and it won't be here tomorrow either. There's another comment that the audio volume is quite low. I know sometimes this happens. I'm just double checking. I am right at the same volume that I usually am, so this may be on the user end. So if there's a widespread problem, I'll look to address it. I did just double check though, and as far as I can tell, there's nothing different from the usual way of things. But today, as I mentioned, I will talk about both the fires that have recently transpired, where we are now, and then also the significant change in the weather coming up this weekend, and also whether or that will be sustained or not, whether this is just the beginning of finally a change towards wetter conditions in Southern California, or just sort of a one-off. The short version is I do think it's closer to a one-off than a sustained change. So, overview of what I expect for this weekend. It probably will start raining later on Sunday across some parts of Southern California, and then across most of Southern California by Sunday evening and on Monday. Snowing in the mountains, even down to 3,500, 4,000 feet. So this is going to be a relatively cold storm, excuse me. And the benefit will be for 95% of Southern California a temporary reduction in wildfire risk, at least for a week or two. A little longer if we're lucky, but unless it gets followed up by another rain event, probably not much longer than that if we have any additional offshore wind events to come. So, Central California, the Central Coast, should get some scattered showers too. The Sierra Nevada will see plenty of cold air and probably some accumulating powdery snow too. Nothing that will really bolster the water content of the snowpack. This will be a few dry inches of snow, but it'll probably make the skiers temporarily happy out there. But not a tremendous amount of snow, but some. Probably more snow in the mountains of Southern California, actually, than in the Sierra Nevada with this one. There's still a little bit of uncertainty whether this low-pressure system is going to end up far enough to the north and west to bring any precipitation to the Bay Area. If it does, it'll probably still just be scattered showers, so a lot of places will remain completely dry. A few places could see some rain. And then also there could be some showers farther south than that, depending on where the low goes. But mainly this is a question, Southern California desperately needs this rain. It has not in recorded history been this dry this late in the year. Going back at least to the mid-1800s and possibly longer. That's just when those records become reliable. So it's a big deal that we've gone this far without rain, and that is really what's allowed this extreme fire weather episode to continue more or less without any real breaks since the beginning of January. So almost the entire month of January will have been a period of extreme wildfire risk in Southern California. And although occasionally there were Santa Ana wind-driven wildfires in Southern California in December and January, it's not like it never happened before, but it was usually a day or two. It was not the whole month of January being bone dry, the driest on record, followed by the driest fall on record, one of the hottest periods on record before that. So it really has also been, as some folks are already mentioning in the comments, It has not been unusually warm the last couple of weeks the whole time. There have been colder periods, but in the last few days in Southern California, and in Central California too, it's been balmy. It's been in the 70s and even locally the 80s. Again, not unheard of for January, but all things put together, this is not only not your typical January in Southern California, but it's a January unlike we've ever seen in recorded history in terms of the utter lack of rainfall through at least the 24th today and the 25th tomorrow. That will change this weekend, but let's put this into perspective. I do think that most of Southern California will see at least a few tenths of an inch of rain Sunday and Monday. A lot of places will see at least a half inch, which is a good soaking. The mountains will probably see an inch, maybe a little more in some spots, which will be great, and some of that will be in the form of snow rather than rain in the mountains. But come early February, it's still possible that some places will be either at or near their driest start to the season on record after this rain event still occurs, because there has been literally nothing before this. Half an inch of rain this weekend will be the only rain that has fallen so far this season, and right now it doesn't look particularly likely that it'll be followed up by all that much more. There could be, there's about a 30 or 40% chance of a secondary system in Southern California about a week after. But if that doesn't materialize, it might remain dry again for quite some time to come. And I am writing a blog post for today. I had intended to get it out before this live session, but due to the 7 hours I spent on the phone with insurance companies in the last 48 hours, I will have a brief personal mention actually at the end of the session about what that's about. I have not had time to wrap it up, but I will try and finish writing that blog post about this weekend's weather right after this session is done. So if you are interested in some of the details, please do check that out. So I'm going to share my screen first, and then come back and take a look at some of the comments after that point. That's the wrong window. Okay, should be the right window. Just double checking that we're seeing. Yeah, okay. So you should be seeing the watch duty fire map right now, and it does remain quite active in Southern California. So of course, pointing out the Palisades fire, which is now largely has been inactive for a while. There are still some evacuation orders in the areas that were the most destroyed by fire, where there were thousands of structures burned due to secondary hazards primarily. There are also, similarly, I think the evacuation orders have generally been lifted on the Eaton fire. There was actually a little bit of a flare-up, it looks like, on the Eaton fire. I don't know if this was potentially a backburn near San Gabriel Peak or a flare-up because it's been so hot and dry. Probably not really a threat to anyone right immediately in populated areas because, again, the winds are blowing from the northeast. That would push this right back into the already burned area. And it may actually be from firefighting operations. This may be a burn operation to sort of get some strengthen control lines. I don't know for sure. Not immediately threatening, but it is just an indication that just because a fire has not been super active recently doesn't mean it can't pop back up. Other significant fires, of course, there was the Sepulveda fire, which is only 45 acres just north of UCLA along the 405 corridor a couple of days ago, or maybe just yesterday. Feels like it's been days. Only 45 acres, but as always, whenever there's a fire in Sepulveda Pass, it's very visible by the millions of people who either can see the 405 or drive past it. So that was dramatic, although now either extinguished or controlled and a non-issue. Much bigger fire that was actually threatening, much more threatening, was the Hughes fire, as I talked about in the last live stream, up by Castaic Lake. This burned over 10,000 acres of mainly grass and brush, and the big concern was that it was going to hop the reservoir here. So obviously here's the reservoir, and there were a couple of spot fires over into this area, but they extinguished all of them, and the big concern was that this wind event was going to push it here, and that once it made it across I-5 it could make it into Ventura County. That didn't happen due to really some pretty aggressive firefighting. And a little bit of luck, of course. This fire ran right into the lake, so if this fire had started maybe over here, it very well could have run through the mobile home park and just into Ventura County across I-5. But instead, this lake is a pretty big fire break, and it did still manage to hop over the lake, but only in a couple spots, and they were able to pick those up. So this was a good stop. Still, though, it was a fire that burned over 10,000 acres very quickly. So as I keep mentioning, time to 10,000 acres burned is a pretty good metric of the initial danger associated with a fire, and this one burned those 10,000 acres in just 12 hours, so that's very quick. There have been other fires. There was the Laguna fire over by Cal State Channel Islands campus. Again, this is in like a grassy, brushy hill, almost completely surrounded by agricultural land, so I think it just goes to show you how incredibly flammable everything is right now. We've actually seen an increase in the rate of fires popping up in the last few days as conditions get even drier than they were before. And this has been true down in down further south too, in San Bernardino, Riverside County, San Diego County. And in San Diego County, there is finally a fire of significant size with some evacuations in effect. That's the Border 2 fire that broke out late yesterday. It's burned over 5,000 acres, so this is another significant fire, and it remains quite active. There are some evacuation warnings on the fringe of populated areas east of Chula Vista, although the winds are now dying down, so I don't really think there's a great deal of danger, although of course, it's not zero, but it's also not as high as it would have been under earlier days with stronger winds. So better now than earlier, but this is again another indication of a significant fire and extreme fire conditions. Watch Duty app doesn't have actual coverage of fires down outside of the U.S., but I did want to mention that there are some much larger and potentially more dangerous fires burning down in northern Baja California, so east of Ensenada. You can see these are not mapped footprints by aircraft. These are satellite detections, but we can clearly see from satellite these are not false detections. There are actually large fires in this area, here as well as here. So again, not a lot of people live in this area, but there are people who live along the Highway 1 corridor here, and then of course in the city of Ensenada. So to the extent that these easterly winds keep pushing fires to the west, that could be a problem, although there will probably be some rain down this far south this weekend as well. Maybe not as much as farther north, but that could potentially help. But just goes to show you that this is not limited to California. In fact, there have also been some significant fires even into Arizona. Recently, there was the Horton fire, which burned 8,300 acres, not too far from, that's further south than I thought it was. So this is up pretty high elevation, up by Promontory Butte. This is a place that's usually snow covered this time of year, and they get an almost 10,000 acre forest fire. So again, not typical conditions throughout a lot of the Southwest right now. It's not just Southern California, it's also northern Mexico, it's also Arizona, etc. You can see that the conditions up in Northern California, you see all these green RXs. These are all prescribed burns, so folks are taking advantage of the fact that conditions have been kind of dry, but not catastrophically so, to get some prescribed burning in, which is good to see. So there's a silver lining to this extended dry period in Northern California for now, following a very wet fall and early winter. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show. Active fires continue in Southern California. No longer any red flag warnings, so for the first time in a while there's none, which is nice. I don't think they'll return for a while. I'd say we're probably done with red flag warnings for a while. Maybe not for the rest of winter, but at least for the next week or so, I think. But until the rains arrive, conditions are still highly anomalously dry and conducive to potentially rapid fire spread, although the winds won't be that strong, fortunately. Here's a satellite view. There's a lot of cirrus clouds, but what you can see, there's actually some smoke from fires in Baja starting to drift northward. So if it's smoky, well, I guess there's fires in Baja, and then also this fire on the north side of the Border 2 fire. If I bring up the infrared imagery, you can see where these active fires are. As you can see, there's one on the northern side, the U.S. side of the border. That's the Border 2 fire, and then these active hot spots down in on Baja. These are actually the more serious-looking fires at the moment, the ones south of the border, affecting areas east of Ensenada. Okay, so what's coming next? Well, here's again a European model, the European model depiction of what's going to happen this weekend, and I want to draw your attention to this low pressure system. Well, actually, let me show you in this form first. You can see this low pressure system is going to slide southward, actually retrograde southwestward, and strengthen as it does so. So instead of doing this inside slider trajectory, it's going to do a bit of a, not really an outside slider, if you will, but sort of a splitting the difference right down the middle of California and then sort of coming offshore. So watch what happens as I step forward in time. This sort of develops in situ in place over the Bay Area and slides southward as we go Sunday into Monday. It's unclear if the system will be able to produce much precipitation over the Bay Area. It might be enough for some isolated to scattered downpours. There's puffy cumulonimbus clouds, isolated showers, maybe even an isolated thunderstorm, since the atmosphere will be cold aloft and unstable, but it will more clearly be able to generate precipitation as it moves more slowly over Southern California, as it picks up some moisture from its brief trek along the central coast, just over the ocean, before moving eastward by Tuesday, bringing some snow finally to Arizona and the Southwest. After that, I'll just continue with this. This is the European ensemble. We kind of lose that signal and we get back to this inside slider signal once again as we go towards February with weak subtropical ridging. So what we see then is precipitation that is consistently in Southern California, except for this brief interlude this weekend, continuing more often below average than not for the foreseeable future. So it could be a one and done. It might be a one and then a much weaker 2 punch and then done, but I don't really see this as a sustained pattern change for Southern California. Northern California might be a bit different. We might get in to see a somewhat wetter pattern in February, although it still doesn't look like a slam dunk and it still doesn't look wetter than average. We might just be able to trend in Northern California closer to average for the time of year, but remaining probably still significantly drier than average in Southern California. Okay, so going back to the European model and showing precipitation, this is what we've got, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the southwest. So stepping forward in time again, you kind of see this precipitation. It's not coming in from the west over the Pacific, but it's kind of just developing in place as this low kind of pops up right over the Bay Area. So what you can see initially, some snow showers over the Sierra Nevada, so probably some snow late Saturday into Sunday along the Sierra Crest, including Tahoe. Not a ton, but at least a few inches of nice powder. This is suggesting that there actually could be some showers and thunderstorms all the way from the northern Bay Area all the way down to the San Diego area. So again, not everyone receiving a downpour, but isolated showers and thunderstorms, so most people won't see them, but if they do, it could be pretty hefty. And this is a bit further north than we've seen before, so this might include the Bay Area with some isolated showers and thunderstorms later on Saturday, mostly tapering off in the Bay Area by Sunday, but then picking up in Southern California with a pretty decent round of showers Sunday and then into Monday, including some meaningful mountain snow before this moves on to the east. So what is a good guess? Well, here's the total accumulated precipitation, which has been creeping up a little bit. So the European model now suggests there could be some rain as far north as the I-80 corridor. That's a bit farther north than it looked like before. Actually, this is the first time I'm seeing that. With the heaviest totals right across coastal Southern California and the mountains there, which is exactly where we need it, which is good. Right now, it's looking like most places will see about a ½ inch of rain in Southern California, which is a nice, solid soaking, finally. The mountains will probably see more like an inch, maybe locally more. Some places may see less than ½ inch. In fact, it's actually possible that LA gets stuck around a ¼ inch, but at this point, I guess you take what you can get. But overall, a solid ½ inch widespread in Southern California with some isolated spots in the mountains over an inch liquid equivalent, some of which will be in the form of snow looks pretty good. Some precipitation, decent precipitation, Southern Sierra as well. If I look at the smoother European model ensemble average, showing a little bit less up north, but a similar amount down south. Again, a pretty solid ½ inch at the lower elevations to maybe an inch in the mountains in Southern California. That's going to be the biggest rain event since, I don't know, before May last year. So it's been a long time. And it's mostly good news, frankly. We're talking about maybe 95% of this being beneficial from a fire risk reduction perspective. The only reason why it's not 100% beneficial is because there will be some thunderstorm activity with heavy downpours. There could be some risk of debris flows and flash floods. Not in most areas, because this is nowhere near a big enough storm to cause flooding in most spots, but in the recent wildfire burn areas, including the fires that burned in the fall, and more recently. So we're talking about everything from the bridge fire, the line fire, the airport fire from September, and then also the Palisades fire, the Eaton fire, the Hearst fire, and then other fires that burned, or the Hughes fire, the Border 2 fire, other fires that have burned within the past 2 weeks in Southern California. All of these areas will be susceptible to unusually rapid runoff and therefore possibly flash flooding and increased debris loading from ash and dirt in the burned areas. If a thunderstorm downpour, even if it's very isolated, sits right over one of these burned watersheds, it could produce a considerable flash flood or debris flow that could be damaging or life-threatening. Again, that's what we saw in January 2018 in Montecito, so in Santa Barbara County, following the Thomas Fire. It was not a widespread flood event, but it was an utterly catastrophic but localized one in and below the transverse ranges near Montecito. That was a deadly and highly destructive event. So I'm not saying we're going to see that this time, but I am saying that it is difficult to know in advance exactly which areas might be under an isolated thunderstorm downpour where you get an inch of rain in an hour. That is possible this weekend, although it will happen only in very few locations. It could theoretically happen over a burn area, and so that is why the Weather Service has issued a flash flood watch only for the burn areas, not generally. If you're not within, adjacent to, or immediately downstream in a watershed that was heavily burned, I really don't think there's any risk at all. So for 95% of folks, or 99 even, this is almost exclusively beneficial water from the sky. But if you happen to be in one of those burn areas, or near them, I would consider very closely what risks might exist and also take any evacuation warnings or orders that might be issued quite seriously, because these are often difficult to foresee in advance. Other than this flash flood watch, it's possible you will not get any further warning of a major debris flow until it is essentially occurring, because we cannot pinpoint the exact location of intense thunderstorm downpours until essentially they are occurring. All we can do the day or two prior is say they are possible in your area, and that is the entire point of issuing this flash flood watch. A flash flood warning would be an indication of imminent danger, as would, of course, your own 2 eyeballs, ears, and any other senses you might have available to use. Ultimately, eyes and ears on the ground are your best tools if you feel uncomfortable. Just as with the fire itself, I would never advise people to ignore official evacuation orders, but sometimes you may need to preemptively protect your own life and property and make decisions based on what you're actually experiencing on the ground, and with the foreknowledge that debris flows are usually a hazard not due to very large cumulative amounts of rain. So these are less of an issue when we have, a storm that drops 5 or 6 inches over 2 or 3 days. The bigger issue is if you get ½ an inch of rain in 30 minutes. So just a torrential, even a very brief but torrential downpour, that is the kind of thing that produces debris flows preferentially. And so those are the kinds of events that could occur this weekend, even though the overall totals will be quite ho-hum for a winter storm. It's only in the context of having this unprecedented level of recent, and by recent I mean some of them still have active flames burning fires a day or two before the rains arrive. So just to drive that point home a little bit about the convective downpours, I did pull up a model to show the convective available potential energy, or CAPE, later this weekend. This is for late Sunday night. And, these aren't huge numbers, 320 joules per kilogram. If you're in the Kansas during tornado season, you would laugh out loud at these puny numbers. Folks there won't get interested until you add a zero to this, essentially in the thousands. But in coastal Southern California, these are actually high enough numbers to develop low-topped showers and low-topped cumulonimbus, so thunderstorm clouds that can produce very heavy rainfall for brief periods in certain locations. So this is the kind of pattern that can produce localized flash flooding and debris flows for sure in and near burn areas. Again, we see later, still not huge numbers, but 300 joules per kilogram across most of the Southern California coast late Sunday night, going into early Monday now, is nothing to sneeze at. As somebody who recently sneezed. So just going to point out that this is probably not a very likely severe weather day, so I think the risk of severe thunderstorms is low. It's not zero. Whenever we have a cold, low-pressure system that's this cold and this cutoff, sometimes you can still see like an isolated severe thunderstorm, a strong winds, or a brief tornadic spin-up or something. Certainly some small hail is possible, even in non-severe thunderstorms. But I think the only real concern I have with this is in the 1 or 2% of the area that we could see overlap between very recent wildfire burn area and an intense thunderstorm downpour, which won't be widespread or likely, but is definitely possible, and if it does occur, could cause big problems locally this weekend. And just to drive home that point about where we are, this is data valid, 2 days ago, so as of January 22nd. If anything, this map, the brown on this map has expanded slightly further since then, but you get the basic idea. Even accounting for the recent dry spell, the northern third of the state is still wetter than average. Significantly wetter than average, in some cases in the top third of wettest seasons on record to date, solely on the basis of what fell in November and December. So we're resting on our laurels here, our early season laurels. All of Central California from about the San Jose area, sort of south and eastward, is definitively below average, although not extremely so only in the driest third of years in this region. But once we get to coastal Southern California, these numbers are extraordinary. Everywhere in the dark brown is essentially experiencing its driest start to the season on record. So this is from October through January 22nd, but if we go back to May, it's a similar picture, maybe even a broader region. This truly is a historic and record-breaking event for this part of Southern California. And not to be outdone, this is also true for places like Las Vegas and southern and western Arizona, where it is similarly record dry start to the winter. So this is a region that had recovered from its long-term drought to a large degree, but now we're actually starting to see severe or even extreme drought redevelop in this region. And right now, although there will be rain this weekend, there will be some temporary alleviation, and perhaps, I doubt that will be the last rain of the season. I mean, some folks are worried that it's not going to rain at all. I don't think that's true. But the odds continue to point toward below average precipitation in Southern California and Arizona for the rest of the season, and for the lower Colorado basin generally. That does mean that the drought in this region is likely to worsen. And it also means that because we have almost zero precipitation accumulated to date, we would need an exceptionally wet winter to get to average. So what this means is that even if we end up getting lucky and seeing precipitation closer to average for the rest of the season, which I actually don't think is likely, but even if we do, we will likely still end well below average for the winter, because we would need something like 200 to 300% of average for the rest of the season, so double to triple the average amount, getting close to a record-breaking finish to the rain season to come out from below average for the rest of the season, just given the deficit that's already accumulated. And right now, I see absolutely no indication of that. It really just looks like the likeliest outcome is continued drier than average, although hopefully not quite as bone dry as it has been. This will have implications for next fire season in the Southwest and in Southern California, for sure. And I don't think that the fire season next year, unless something changes dramatically, is going to look like the last couple. I think it's going to be a much bigger fire year in this part of the world, but we'll talk about that more later. You never know. There can always be surprises. Maybe we'll get a miracle March, but right now that looks like it's where we're headed. Okay, I'm going to go back to showing my face so I can switch back over to the comments. All right, here. Hoping we get enough rain, JJ comments, to clear some of the ash and smoke out of the air. I think that very likely will happen. So, in fact, in my forthcoming blog post that I haven't yet published, I specifically mentioned that Sunday and Monday should probably have pretty great air quality in Southern California. So maybe that's something that people can go out and enjoy, take a literal breather after the last couple of weeks. If we can make it through unscathed from a debris flow perspective, I think this will be a pretty big collective sigh of relief in Southern California. Allow people to get their bearings and focus a little bit less on fires, allow some of those fire crews from out of state and out of region to go home, finally, even if we may still face more fire issues down the road if the rains don't continue, as it looks like they might not. But for now, once we get to the rains on Sunday in Southern California, I think we will get a breather, both literally and figuratively in that sense. I think I mentioned Northern California. Some rain, some showers, maybe even convective downpours or an isolated thunderstorm as far north as the Bay Area. So not everyone will get wet, but if you happen to be under an isolated downpour, you might get quite wet. So this is a classic situation where a 20 or 30% chance of rain. It probably won't rain, but that doesn't tell you how wet you'll get if it does. And this is one of those cases where if it does rain, it wouldn't be drizzle, it would be probably a heavy downpour. So it's either all or nothing. Down south, the odds are just generally higher. So there will be more downpours around, and at some point, everyone will likely see one, at least, maybe two. I'm not really concerned about lightning-started wildfires from this scenario, because if there is a cloud deep enough to produce lightning, it will be producing rain, and probably fairly heavy rain. So this is not really a dry thunderstorm kind of setup. Sometimes wet thunderstorms can still result in fire ignitions, so I guess it's in the extreme tail of possibilities, but this is not an event I would peg as being a real lightning-ignited fire risk event. It's crazy to even be talking about that at all in December. I understand why people are concerned, but this is a case where if you get lightning, you will very likely get rain, probably a pretty good downpour along with it. So I'm not super concerned about that in this case. I would be pretty surprised if we saw lightning-ignited fires in this pattern. I got a lot of questions about this Moss Landing battery fire. This is a fire that occurred, I think, at a Tesla battery facility, like an energy storage facility at the Moss Landing power plant in Monterey. I think it was in Monterey County, just off of Highway 1. Again, I'm not actually a general fire expert, and this was an industrial commercial fire. It had no wildland fire component, and therefore it doesn't directly have anything to do with weather or climate. There is an air pollution, atmospheric air quality angle for sure. I am really not an expert in that, other than to say that generally when large lithium, I believe they were lithium-based batteries burn, they're especially in commercial scale build-outs, there are a lot of nasty chemicals, including certain highly dangerous acids, heavy metals, and some other things that can and were at one point airborne. But beyond that, I don't really have, I am not the right person to be commenting about that or the residual risk that might exist. I genuinely, I'm not an environmental toxicologist, nor am I an industrial fire expert. There's a comment that there have been a few small fires in the Sacramento Valley and the foothills in the last few days, even a 20-acre one. That's not surprising, given that we've had 3 now very dry and pretty windy weeks as well. This is a good indication, though, is that none of these fires have been large or destructive, and that there are a lot of prescribed fires going on. What does this tell us? It tells us that the landscape is dry enough to burn, but it's not dry enough to burn very intensely or very aggressively, generally speaking, in Northern California because of antecedent moisture. That is when you want to do prescribed burning, when it's dry enough to have meaningful combustion of vegetation. You can't do it if it's sopping wet. You can imagine why. You also don't want to do it when it's exceptionally dry, hot, and windy, and it is not those things right now. It is sufficiently, marginally dry enough for fires to occur in vegetation, but not so dry that they occur with high intensity or great rates of spread. These are all fires that have been, quite frankly, relatively easy to manage and contain and extinguish relative to what's been going on in Southern California. So I understand why people are concerned, but a lot of the smoke plumes you're seeing are from prescribed fires. There have been a few that aren't, but even the ones that aren't are not really all that concerning. Now, to be fair, this next system is not going to bring rain north of I-80, so or at least not much north, maybe a little bit north. So it will continue to dry out, and it will continue to be windy. And that doesn't mean that there couldn't be, a wildfire or a wildfire that theoretically threatens properties, but it just is not that high of a risk in the scheme of things. And it's not something I would be worried about unless, if we truly went another full month without any rain in Northern California, then we might start to have a different conversation. But I don't think that's very likely, so I'm not particularly concerned about that. I'm actually still more concerned about Southern California following this rain event if it doesn't follow it up by another one, because 1 or 2 Santa Ana wind events and we'll be back where we are now, because that's how much water they can evaporate. They're these atmospheric blow dryers. So we will see what happens. But I do think I'm not super concerned about Northern California right now. Southern California is going to get a break. There's a comment that some of the fires down in Baja California have destroyed houses. I'm not surprised. They look like they're quite large, pretty intense, and there are, when I say not highly populated, it doesn't mean that nobody lives there. And there have also been other brush fires in the wildland urban interface in Tijuana, Ensenada, and then some of the other border communities more along the interior border of Southern California, more in the mountains. There's a much larger population on the Mexican side of the border in the mountains that are on the U.S. side are in interior San Diego County. But once you go south of the border, there's actually a lot more people who live in the mountains there than on the American side of the border. So it's actually much more of a wildland urban interface problem south of the border in that region than north of it. Now, obviously, once you get far enough west in San Diego County, there's lots of people in that interface, but that's sort of what is going on to the south. Thanks for the kind words. Again, I was on Star Talk recently with Neil deGrasse Tyson, also on the Factually podcast with Adam Conover. Both of those I still think are relevant in understanding what's going on, so I do encourage folks to check it out. There's a question from Christina. For people in Santa Monica and Rustic Canyon, would you leave? How long is the danger of slides after the rain ends if it's a downpour in that location? So with debris flows are different than deep-seated landslides. Debris flows happen fast. They generally aren't lagged. They usually occur during the extreme downpour or within 20 or 30 minutes thereafter. Sometimes in desert areas they can travel for miles and take some hours, but generally in Southern California, because the topography is so steep, if there's going to be a debris flow, usually it happens while it is actively pouring, either where you are or where the material is on the mountain. So they're pretty much, once the heavy rain is over in the region, there's really no further risk of debris flows. Landslides are different. Deep-seated landslides, when you have risk, that has to do with the cumulative saturation of the hill slope, and so those can occur even months after wet winters, for example. But we have the opposite problem right now. The hillsides are parched and dry, so there's actually not really much if any risk of deep-seated landslides. It's the short, flashy stuff that we'd be worried about. So once the rain it moves out of the area, there's really no lingering hazard. In terms of specific places, that is so dependent on like even which side of the street you're on. I'm sorry to say. Generally speaking, if you live, if you can see a large burned area uphill from where you are, upslope, or you're on a creek or a stream or even a normally dry arroyo or canyon or something that's immediately downhill of a large burned area, and you're within a certain vertical distance of the bottom of that drainage, there is probably some risk. Generally, local officials are going to be highlighting this. I'm not 100% sure how quickly that happens. These fires just occurred, and some of them are even still burning, and so I'm not 100% sure there's going to be as much warning as there would otherwise be from like county officials, for example. I don't think the USGS has been able to do their mapping yet, but generally speaking, the big risk is going to be along the Pacific Coast Highway from the Palisades fire, possibly in Topanga Canyon and any of the like Temescal Canyon, any of those canyons that drain down into or over or under the Pacific Coast Highway. So there's going to be a lot of erosion, probably lots of small debris flows, mudslides along the PCH, which I believe is still closed to the public. So this is mostly still areas under a mandatory evacuation order anyway. So this is mainly going to be risk for firefighters and other first responders in the area, plus anybody who's visiting their potentially burned homes. I'm not super concerned about Santa Monica because I guess Rustic Canyon is probably the easternmost watershed where there's going to be major potential for inflow from debris flows. I mean, I guess there's the fire did burn into, where am I thinking? Let me just take a look. It's actually, I can take a look at a map right now. So actually, maybe I'll share this. This is a good question. I'll do a screen share here. So I'm going back to watch duty to show this. So here's the Palisades fire. The red area is where the evacuation orders are, but I'm going to turn off the evacuation order layers if I can. I always forget where these are. Okay. I don't think I can turn off the evacuation order layers. So anyway, the area that I would be most concerned about is probably like, you know, the Pacific Coast Highway itself, all the way from about Will Rogers State Beach all the way to Malibu. There's probably going to be a lot of problems along that highway, and then all of these roads in canyons that come down. Rustic Canyon, I think that's sort of in here. Somewhere. So that's sort of the easternmost part of the burn footprint. So generally speaking, I think that this is the area which is still under evacuation order, and also has been largely devastated by the fire. That's the biggest concern. There could conceivably be some more localized issues sort of right along the fringe in these neighborhoods here, maybe even up to and including Mandeville Canyon, which is this road. There could even be some localized issues, along the 405 from Sepulveda fire. That's small. I'm not as worried at scale, but the bigger issue is probably along and near the Pacific Coast Highway and the drainages along it, and then also on the Eaton fire to the east. This is a little bit harder to tell. There's the Eaton Canyon itself is probably at significant risk of a debris flow, so the areas there's a bunch of debris basins that the city has set up, knowing that this is a high debris flow risk area. So there is some contingencies, but there could be problems really, in general in this region. And again, a lot of this has already been devastated by fire, but there could be some non-overlap between places where that did not burn and could be potentially at risk. So it's very property level specific, and it's hard for me to be more detailed than that. There could also be some issues up by, again, the Hughes fire, although not a lot of people live right up in the immediate burn area, so it's scheme of things, not all that concerned. All of these smaller fires that have occurred could produce localized issues. There could be some problems down sort of downstream of the border fire. So, these sorts of neighborhoods may be potentially at risk. But again, I'm mainly concerned about Pacific Coast Highway and then right downhill from the Eaton fire. All right. So there's a lot of other questions, kind of wide-ranging about meteorology and climate, and unfortunately, I just don't have the bandwidth to talk about all of them today. All interesting, but I still gotta finish this blog post this evening. All right, here. I wish I was much better rested, but it sadly not quite the case. There have been any number of really extreme, historic, and record-breaking weather events just this week. In addition to what's going on in Southern California, there's the historic windstorm in Ireland, which is now rivaled or exceeded the ones from folk tales from previous centuries in terms of the scale of things. New Orleans got almost a foot of snow earlier this week, which is ludicrously wild. At Houston, Texas, had sleddable snow. I-10 has been shut down due to solid ice on it right along the Gulf Coast. I can talk about that maybe next week. I just have a backlog of things to talk about. This is what happens when everything goes crazy. It all goes crazy at once. Okay, so there's confirmation from Steve. This is helpful that the LA County debris flow hazards map has not yet been updated with predictions from the USGS, and that's probably because, again, these fires are still burning and they just occurred. So this is one of the hazards with late season and even winter fires, is that they are literally in the rainy season, and if and when the rain does occur, there's very little time to prepare and map it out. So right now it's a little bit nebulous. Yeah, John McPhee's book on the control of nature is if you want to know more about Southern California debris flows, and in particular the debris basins and what they can and can't achieve, it is a very good read. All right, so I think I've covered mostly what I wanted to cover today. I'll just recap some of this for those folks who joined a little bit later. The fire weather threat continues through tomorrow, although it has already declined because the winds are down. It's still warm. It's still record dry out there, so don't spark an unwanted wildfire. But ultimately, by Sunday, the rain will probably arrive in Southern California. It won't be continuous heavy rain. It'll be showers, even scattered showers, but they will be heavy at times. And so between Sunday and Monday, almost everybody should pick up at least a quarter inch. A lot of folks will see a half inch. And if you're in the mountains, you may be lucky enough to see an inch or more of liquid equivalent, which, if you're above 4,000 feet or so, will probably be as a pretty heavy snowfall. So that's good. This will be a primarily beneficial rain event, except for, and to the extent to which heavy thunderstorm downpours, and there will be some isolated downpours this weekend in Southern California, could produce debris flows in and near the recent fire zones. And if those do occur, they could be quite consequential. So this is one of those, there's a decent chance it won't happen, but if it does, it could be a real big, dangerous problem. So we don't know yet. It's impossible to pinpoint the exact location of individual isolated thunderstorm downpours. They won't happen everywhere. They won't happen most places. But if one of them does occur in the wrong place at the wrong time, then it will pose some real challenges. But overall, I think everyone wants to see rain, and there will be rain this weekend in Southern California. So there is that. Beyond that, it's unclear whether the rain will stick around, though. It really does not look like there's strong evidence that this is a trend towards a wetter pattern. It continues to look like the next several weeks are more likely to end up drier than average than not in Southern California. So we could see reemergence of wildfire risk once again if we get another Santa Ana wind event in California a week or two from now. So we will see. I'll keep my fingers crossed we get another rain event, but unless that happens, this is not enough to end fire season in Southern California, but it is enough to mitigate it for at least a week and probably two in many areas. So we'll take it. Just be careful if there are any heavy downpours near debris flow risk zones near fires, because there won't probably be a whole lot of warning until they happen at this point. We know it's possible. The Weather Service has issued a flash flood watch for the burn areas for specifically that low but potentially high consequence outcome. The rain will be more scattered or isolated the farther north you go, but could extend, at least in terms of very isolated downpours, up into the San Francisco Bay Area I-80 corridor. There will be some snow in the Sierra, probably more snow in the mountains of Southern California, where will be some places could see a foot of snow at 6,000 feet, say, in the San Bernardino, San Gregorio Mountains. And with that, I should go wrap up my blog post. That'll be out there in the world in probably the next half an hour, so check that out for more details. And I will be traveling in California next week, so I may not have a live session until the end of next week, so maybe a week from today potentially, unless something really big happens with the debris flow at risk Sunday or Monday. Then I might pop in for another unscheduled session. Hopefully I don't have to, but I may do it from the road if that's the case. So thanks everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.